The priest came immediately in his surplice, preceded by a choir boy who rang a bell to announce the passage of the host through the parched and quiet country. Some men who were working at a distance took off their large hats and remained motionless until the white vestment had disappeared behind some farm buildings. The women who were making up the sheaves stood up to make the sign of the cross. The frightened black hens ran away along the ditch until they reached a well-known hole, through which they suddenly disappeared, while a fowl which was tied in a meadow took fright at the sight of the surplice, and began to gallop round and round, kicking cut every now and then. The acolyte in his red cassock walked quickly, and the priest, with his head inclined toward one shoulder and his square biretta on his head, followed him, muttering some prayers, while last of all came La Rapette, bent almost double, as if she wished to prostrate herself as she walked with folded hands, as they do in church. Honor saw them pass in the distance, and he asked, "Where is our priest going?" His man, who was more intelligent, he replied, "He is taking the sacrament to your mother, of course." The peasant was not surprised, and said, "That may be," and went on with his work. Mother Bontemps confessed, received absolution and communion, and the priest took his departure, leaving the two women alone in the suffocating room, while La Rapette began to look at the dying woman and to ask herself whether it could last much longer. The day was on the wane, and gusts of cooler air began to blow, causing a view of Epinal, which was fastened to the wall by two pins, to flap down up and down. The scanty window curtains, which had formerly been white, but were now yellow and covered with fly specks, looked as if they were going to fly off, as if they were struggling to get away, like the old woman's soul. Lying motionless with her eyes open, she seemed to await with indifference that death which was so near and which yet delayed its coming. Her short breathing whistled in her constricted throat. It would stop altogether soon, and there would be one less woman in this world. No one would regret her. At nightfall, Honor returned, and when he went up to bed and saw that his mother was still alive, he asked, "How is she?" just as he had done formerly when she had been ailing, and then he sent La Rapette away, saying to her, "Tomorrow morning at 5 o'clock, without fail," and she replied, "Tomorrow at 5 o'clock." She came at daybreak and found Honor eating his soup, which he had made himself before going to work, and the sick nurse asked him, "Well, is your mother dead?" "She is rather better, on the contrary," he replied, with a sly look out of the corner of his eyes, and he went out. La Rapette, seized with an anxiety, went up to the dying woman, who remained in the same state, lethargic and impassive, with her eyes open and her hands clutching the counterpane. The nurse perceived that this might go on thus for 2 days, 4 days, 8 days, and her avaricious mind was seized with fear. While she was furious at the sly fellow who had tricked her, and at the woman who would not die, nevertheless she began to work, and waited, looking intently at the wrinkled face of the Mother Bontemps. When Honor returned to breakfast, he seemed quite satisfied, and even in a bantering humour. He was decidedly getting in his wheat under very favourable circumstances. La Rapette was becoming exasperated. Every minute now seemed to her so much time and money stolen from her. She felt a mad inclination to take this old woman, this headstrong old fool, this obstinate old wretch, and to stop that short, rapid breath which was robbing her of her time and money, by squeezing her throat a little. But then she reflected on the danger of doing so, and other thoughts came into her head. So she went up and to the bed and said, "Have you ever seen the devil?" Mother Bontemps murmured, "No." Then the sick nurse began to talk and to tell her tales which were likely to terrify the weak mind of the dying woman. "Some minutes before one dies, the devil appears," she said, "to all who are in the death throes. He has a broom in his hand, a saucepan on his head, and he utters loud cries. When anybody sees him, all is over, and that person has only a few moments longer to live. She then enumerated all those to whom the devil had appeared that year: Josephine Losel, Orlali Ratir, Sophie Padaknu, Seraphine Grosspide, Mother Bontemps, who had at least become disturbed in mind, moved about, wrung her hands, and tried to turn her head to look toward the end of the room. Suddenly La Rapette disappeared at the foot of the bed. She took a sheet out of the cupboard and wrapped herself up in it. She put the iron saucepan on her head so that its 3 short bent feet rose up like horns, and she took a broom in her right hand and a tin pail in her left, which she threw up suddenly so that it might fall to the ground noisily. When it came, it certainly made a terrible noise. Then, climbing up on a chair, the nurse lifted up the curtain which hung at the bottom of the bed, and showed herself, gesticulating and uttering shrill cries into the iron saucepan which covered her face, while she menaced the old peasant woman, who was nearly dead, with her broom. Terrified, with an insane expression on her face, the dying woman made a superhuman effort to get up and escape. She even got her shoulders and chest out of bed. Then she fell back with a deep sigh. All was over, and La Rapette calmly put everything back into its place: the broom into the corner by the cupboard, the sheet inside it, the saucepan on the hearth, the pail on the floor, and the chair against the wall. Then, with professional movement, she closed the dead woman's large eyes, put a plate on the bed, and poured some holy water into it. Placing in it the twig of boxwood that had been nailed to the chest of drawers, and kneeling down, she fervently repeated the prayers for the dead, which she knew by heart as a matter of business. And when Honor returned in the evening, he found her praying, and he calculated immediately that she had made 20 sous out of him, for she had only spent 3 days and 1 night, which made 5 francs altogether, instead of the 6 which he owed her.